So the theme for this afternoon is really kind of taking the next step around not just innovation, but also how are we building a culture of innovation in-house. And to kick things off, I'm really thrilled to have an interview with two of my favorite people in all of Insuretech. Peggy and Megan, please come up and join me on stage.
Thanks, Jason. Your favorite.
So I was just joking that I could probably give an introduction for both of you two. And it might be a little more colorful than what you might say about yourself. But please do give our audience just a minute, who you are, your background, and kind of why you're here in Nashville with us.
Well, Peggy Klingel, and I am Director of Corporate Development at Allstate Insurance, where I focus on startup engagement strategy and programs. So what that means is my team helps identify potential new companies and technology, connect them to the right business unit that has a need for that technology, and then we stay with them through the whole process from demo. If it goes into a test, we help structure it and get it through all that legal, privacy, security, procurement stages to make it faster and simpler, both for our business unit that's not an expert in those processes and for our potential partner, so that we accelerate that test and learn process. And I'm happy to be here. I haven't been to Nashville before downtown, so I came in on Friday, enjoyed the 100+ degree heat on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but still super fun place to be, wonderful restaurants, look forward to coming back again. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you, Peggy. Megan?
All right, my name is Megan Brandt, and I am from Des Moines, Iowa, little insurance capital of the Midwest. I run the Global Insurance Accelerator with my partner Dan down here, but I get to run the mentorship program, which is a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, because I know the topic is about how to build culture in-house, and while I am technically out of house for a lot of insurance companies, I do get to watch a lot of insurance professionals learn through mentoring founders and then go back into their larger companies and take their lessons with them. But the Global Insurance Accelerator, I'll call the GIA, just to lighten that up a little bit. But we are an innovation platform for insurance carriers, and we bring in early stage insurance startups to Iowa every year for a 100-day program. And so I'll keep it there for now to not make it more complex.
All right, well, and for full disclosure, I used to serve on the board of the GIA with Peggy. And I love to say the reason it's called the Global Insurance Accelerator and not the Global Insuretech Accelerator, because it was started 9 years ago before Insuretech was even a word.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with in-house. So Peggy, fostering a culture of innovation, building a culture of innovation has been on the topic of everyone's mind for quite some time, and certainly accelerated probably by AM Best, talking about, kind of the internal innovation scoring in addition to the results. Maybe just share for our audience the journey that you have taken Allstate on to get to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks. It has been a journey. It's been a little over 5 years now. But came to Allstate to put together this startup engagement program. Started in claims innovation, and then as we started to make some progress there and had some successes, it grew to be more across the enterprise. So I always, when I work with companies and talk about implementing change, it's easy to start with finding your friends. There's not going to be a whole bunch of raving fans all over the organization that are saying, yay, let's make things change, let's do some new stuff. But there's always some groups that are excited about looking at new technology and partnering externally, and they're looking at trends, and they're looking for more creative ways to take care of their customer and meet their business goals. So I always start with the friends, and in the case of Allstate, that was this claims innovation team, which is actually our largest innovation team at the time, and helped them start to be a better partner for the startups. We originally wanted to run an accelerator, and as we got started looking at how that would work, we had to take a step back and move first to getting ourselves ready internally. So a lot of the process really has been centered on making sure that we understand what the steps are that we need to take in order to onboard a partner. How do we evaluate technology? Who all needs to weigh in from the organization? And then do that quickly My first contract took 5 months, a small test agreement, and that's clearly not acceptable to an Insuretech company. But and it was a GIA company, and he was very, very understanding. I said, here's the deal. I've not done this before here at Allstate, so partner up with whoever else you want. Eventually, I'll come back to you with some questions, but I don't know what to expect. 5 months later, we got a contract to them. And a month or two after that, when they were ready, they could work with us, and we did a small test with them. But that process then was our first win, if you will, 5 months. But it showed us that instead of just jumping into an accelerator, we could do more by working with our stakeholders across the organization, the legal, privacy, security, procurement teams, to find ways to compress and accelerate that whole process of bringing a contract to a potential partner. So we have a smaller contract just for early stage companies, and instead of a very serial, long process to get through, we kind of run parallel processes on my team to get security looking at things while privacy's looking at things, while architecture's looking at things, so that we kind of run through it a lot faster. And building on that, then it's a matter of taking it to other parts of the organization, and it's a slow process to expand, but it's really amazing how fast it will start to take off when your first groups start to evangelize and have the success that they can share across the organization.
Well, I can certainly attest to that. I've been on that journey as well. But I would also say that no one can just do it in-house. Because you need to get out of your own four walls and learn what others are doing. And sometimes it's coming to conferences and learning from your peers and meeting new Insuretechs. There's also just been a big growth of potential platform or ecosystems. I mean, there are so many accelerators now. Venture capital firms like ours, offer platform engagements. And I so often say, you need to be involved in 1, 2, 3, or more, because if you're just looking inward or only looking at one piece, you're not seeing the full landscape. And so, Megan, I think what the GIA does is an integral part into building a culture of innovation. And so maybe just share a best practice or two of how some of the carriers, Allstate and your other investor companies, have leveraged the GIA for their own benefit.
Right. So we're going to talk a lot about the mentorship piece of the GIA, and I'm going to brag a lot about it. It's just such an honor to work there. It's going to sound kind of cheesy, but I get to run a program where I have 115 volunteers who are all insurance professionals. So they come from all lines of insurance, 40 different carriers are represented, and every single person's a volunteer. So about 60% of our mentors come from companies who are not even on our board. They're just people who found us throughout the years and wanted to get involved with innovation, raise their hand and help some founders and give back. But then we have our board members, our board companies also get people involved, and we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, but what these people are doing is you get to send somebody from your product marketing team, somebody who's a claims adjuster, somebody who's in IT, and they're like, what am I doing? And they're going to meet a bunch of founders who don't know what they don't know, and it gives an opportunity for any of you or any of your people to meet with these companies who are hungry, who are agile, who move so fast, who don't take no for an answer, but they have to eventually and learn a lesson. But I get the joy of watching the mentors learn so many things about the way their business can start to do something better. So they get to take it back home internally, work differently with their team and their leadership. I don't know if that's a best practice, but it's just
no. It's a great, professional development opportunity for those individuals to not only share their expertise and their talents, but also to get exposed to what's happening outside. Because let's face it, so many of our underwriting managers, our claims directors, et cetera, I mean, they're nose down, getting their job done, and they are always afforded the opportunity to really see what else is happening around the industry. And so, Peggy, I think so much of this also comes back to talent, right? And how are we developing our people? How are we engaging our people? So what are maybe some of the lessons you've learned, whether it's through the GIA or other ecosystems, for engaging your people in this innovation movement?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really is about finding the right people to engage as mentors even. So when I first started, I was having kind of one-on-one meetings, just quick meetings to get to know folks and understand what their background was and what their interest level was in technology and in partnering and what their experience had been. And so we were pretty selective early on who we had as mentors. In fact, I started with some senior leaders the first year, and then it slowly kind of trickled down into their organizations as they got familiar with the program. But then they selected people that were also curious and tenacious to get things done in the business, that would be able to take what they learned from mentoring and meeting with these Insuretech companies and bring some of that back into the organization. So as I look at like our innovation teams, it's really a variety of different personality types, because diverse teams work really well for innovation, from being able to conduct business meetings and develop relationships, but also to developing analytics, getting data and making data-driven decisions. So I've worked with all kinds of different backgrounds, but especially early on, tried to make sure that we had the ones that could be the evangelists for the future mentors and to help represent the program and what we were doing.
Well, ladies, that clock is ticking really fast. So let me pause and say to the audience, use the app, ask questions. I'm going to be trying to get through as many as we can, so please feel free to submit those now if you want them to be considered. Megan, I think I've been through your mentor training personally, and I think that's such an integral part of how you engage with carriers and these leaders, maybe that have never had exposure to working with a startup before. I mean, it's different. I mean, our underwriters, our claims people, they're used to working with, seasoned legacy, vendors and suppliers who already know everything about insurance. Maybe what advice do you have for our audience, or, what are some of the tidbits from your mentor training that would be helpful for those of us in the audience who are trying to figure out where to start?
Oh my goodness. All right, so I'd say the training has definitely shifted from, this is definitely an audience of people who like logistics. I'm gonna logistically explain to you what you're about to encounter. But the moment that they get face-to-face with a startup founder and they get a little nervous about how they can be helpful, I'd say, I guess tidbits of help for people who wanna talk to founders or talk to this group of people is to have an open mind. And that sounds, again, so really cliche. But I think if you have a preconceived idea on how something will work and how your department will function and how a product can move through a company, those ideas can be challenged all the time. And we've seen it happen. And if you come in with your mindset like that, then you're not really going to get anywhere. I guess I've learned that. There's a lot of the softer side, the psychology side of working with startup companies is what we've been learning a lot lately. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
And I would just add to that, I think one of the things that's also helpful, and I tell some of our folks that are going through Megan's training, which is fantastic, by the way. I mean, really helps them understand what to expect. It's not necessarily that they have to be an expert in that company's business area, but it's also sometimes just about opening your contacts and making connections that can turn out to be helpful. They don't have to be an expert in whatever business area that company is, that Insuretech is working on.
Well, as I said earlier, so much about this industry is relationships. And I also know, as some of you, so many of our founders in the Insuretech space, air quotes, didn't start off to solve an insurance problem, right? They were entrepreneurs, they saw a problem, they thought, hey, there's a technology opportunity to help solve this. But because of that, there's often a lack of understanding about all the complexities and challenges, for better or for worse, that happen in our industry. So Peggy, maybe how have you partnered with Insuretechs? What are some of those lessons you've learned? Because it's a lot on our side. I'm sure if the first one took 5 months, it probably wouldn't take 5 months today, but probably not 5 days.
Close.
That's awesome.
Close.
So what's the advice? How do you get from 5 months to 5 days in partnering with startup companies?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with having a plan and a goal, and having, as I said, some groups within the organization that are willing to partner with you. I couldn't have done it without procurement and legal and privacy. And frankly, there's a whole history of innovation in Allstate, in pockets all over the organization. So there was help in IT, and there was help in architecture. There were people that said, all right, yes, this is why we need this information. And we had to map out that whole contract process because it hadn't been done before. And when we did, and I had somebody on my team use Visio, it was an amazing, just a mess of if and then and where it's going next and swim lanes, and it was just awful. And nobody had ever done that before. But finding the people that could help with all that took time, and it took us a couple years really to get to the point where it was, an ongoing process. But every contract we did, we learned more, and we got it down to 2 weeks right now. If from the time we know what we're testing, and we put it on a one-pager with us and the partner company, here's what we're gonna do, here's who's doing what, how it's gonna be measured for success. Once I get that, we can get it through. If we're not sharing private data, our goal is to have a contract in their hands in 10 days. And if we are going through a full security review, it's 5 weeks. And we had about 85% of our agreements last year that we worked on hit those goals. And but it's 5 years into this now, and we're pretty consistent. And it takes a lot of work with people from around the organization and finding like-minded people that really are passionate about moving innovation forward in the business.
Yeah, I have often think about it as kind of the arc of innovation journey. Like, kind of start with like the chasing the shiny objects. You just got to go out and figure out what's out there. And then you go through this processization where you build processes and ask yourself, how are you going to build metrics? What are you trying to measure? What are you trying to accomplish? And then that next phase, that third horizon, is really around getting a path to ROI. So you have those processes. It's now repeatable. You're not reinventing the wheel. So let's talk about ROI. And I don't just mean return on investment. I also mean return on innovation, if I can twist the words a little bit. So Megan, since you have worked with so many carriers over the last few years, what do you think some of the benefits that you see the carriers taking back in to their own organizations?
Right, I think there's a few. Some that are easy to touch on right away would probably be that they encourage innovation.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of mentors, a lot of people in the middle, lower, every part of the organization who sees their leaders take part in programs and who put their, some of our leaders, Peggy served as a mentor before too, you've served as a mentor. I think people who show that they're putting actions behind their words really have helped their whole company feel like they actually are looking for innovation. And, sorry, what was your full question?
No, I think that gets it. And same question to you, Peggy, as well. In terms of those engagements, where are you seeing results?
Yeah, when I first started, there were no results, right? Because you're starting from scratch. And so it's really about activity metrics, and that's what we started with. How many demos are happening? How many different business units are getting engaged? How many tests are happening? And especially with that contract process, because that was our biggest initial hurdle, we were tracking every single step and how many days between each of those and who had to touch it and things like that. So a lot of activity and process kind of metrics initially to know that we're measuring something, we're making some progress because we're reaching more people, we're condensing our timelines. But then ultimately you want to shift it as you start to have those success stories into business results, whether that's premium increased, expense savings. There's a lot of expense savings that can happen sometimes with the new technology. And that's where partnering with the business unit becomes so important because we can't measure that ourselves. We know what the plan was up front before we move to a commercial agreement or an investment in a business. But without the business themselves also being involved in tracking the success of that relationship, we're not able to see that. So that, to be honest, is still a work in progress. We've got some where we know exactly how well we did, and others, it's like it's going, it's running, and they're off and doing stuff. And it's like I couldn't go back and say exactly how did we meet those original numbers. It's hard to. It is hard to do that sometimes.
Well, I think we have time for one more question each. So Megan, and a question from the audience, how can I be chosen as a mentor if I'm interested? I'm going to add a second part to that, though. If there are carriers out here interested in engaging with the GIA, are you taking new carrier partners? How can these folks get involved in the GIA?
Yeah, anyone in here can be a mentor. The bar is low for here. It's an application process.
So it's not just an automatic.
I raise the bar.
automatic.
I
Anyone
raise
can
the
apply.
bar the moment you need to go to a training, and that's usually where people do. I'll have a conversation all day with any of you. You apply, you're in the system, but then the moment you have to go through a training with me, so sorry. And then it comes time to meet the founders, and you have to meet them individually, and there's a lot of work in that piece. So the bar's low to get in, and then you have to prove it. That's kind of how it goes. And the moment you don't prove it, axe you get right out. So you have to get yourself in. But for anybody can mentor, even if you're not from one of our carrier partners. But we love our carrier partners. We have a variety of regional players who are in the Midwest. We have a bunch of people like Allstate or Markel and people in Principal. But there's a lot of benefits from being a partner with us. You get like up to 6 mentors who get to be a part of the program. You get to sit on the board. You get to watch all the applications come in from our founders. You get to be the ones who vote, and you get to be a part of a fund. So www.globalinsuranceaccelerator.com or Megan and you'll reach one of the 2 staff members who work there.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And Peggy, last question for you is really kind of around a question again from the audience around culture of innovation. The question is around servant leadership. So kind of bringing that servant leadership from the top, but then also how do you become open to ideas from maybe less tenured or less experienced team members that maybe aren't the SMEs but still have great ideas? How do you engage kind of the top down and then the grassroots as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a struggle sometimes, especially for large organizations, and I think in the insurance industry in general, people sometimes get pocketed in certain business areas, and it's hard for them to get out, and yet they want to help with innovation. So at Allstate, we have what we call an Entrepreneurs at Allstate group, an employee resource group with over 700 members from around our offices globally. And we run programs through that group and bubble up ideas from internally and run a startup challenge, as that group calls it, in July every year, where we bring together teams to present new ideas in response to a business unit challenge question or business problem that they bring to this group. So that's one way that we start to see things coming from different areas of the business. The other interesting thing that I've watched is our ability, as we bring in partners, to see different team members get involved in even kickoff meetings and the intro to the new technology, demos. We have people sit in on demos that are just there to learn about the technology sometimes. And so we try to share information across silos as much as possible.
I think that's so important, for everyone in the organization to have that opportunity to see the visibility, to get excited, to get engaged about what's happening, and to see their company leaders support that as well is definitely a recipe for success. Peggy, Megan, I think that we could continue to chat all afternoon and not run out of topics, but unfortunately we have. So thank you both very much for your time and insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peggy. So we're going to take that and go just a little bit deeper with another friend of mine who's going to come up and give a case study of Cincinnati Insurance innovation journey. So please help me welcome Wendy Buckowitz to the stage. Wendy?
It's my emergency kit. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Wendy. And I will be taking questions from the audience as well, so please feel free to submit those during the app during Wendy's talk.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for coming. My emergency kit is here because, of course, just before this, my postnasal drip started going, so I'm there. I'll save myself. Thank you for coming to this talk on defining and implementing a strategic innovation discipline. I'm Wendy Buckowitz, the Director of Strategic Innovation at Cincinnati Insurance. And today, in the 20 minutes we have together, I'm going to tell you about myself and my company because I think both who I am and who my company is have shaped how we understand innovation and how our innovation discipline has evolved over the past 3.5 years. And then I'm going to take you on a tour of some of the highlights of our innovation journey, talk about where we decided to get started, how we used our own innovation methodology to figure out what to work on, how to work on it, fast forward through some progress and accomplishments, but I'm also going to leave you with a very honest assessment of a big challenge that we still face. So I heard that Jim Stryker also put a photo of himself in his presentation, which I think is kind of amusing that I did too. So I came to Cincinnati and Cincinnati Insurance in 2019 to stand up an innovation lab. Prior to that, I was at Munich Re North America, where I stood up an innovation lab. And this is the sum total of my experience in the insurance and reinsurance industry. Prior to that, I held roles as a practitioner or a consultant in strategy and innovation. Now, the bulk of my career has been spent outside of insurance. 7 years is long enough to gain some industry knowledge, but in the insurance industry, it registers as a nanosecond. So I am viewed as an outsider. And it is with that outsider's lens that I come to this role. And that has both pros and cons. And the biggest negative is trust, right? I come to an organization where trust is important in any big organization to get anything done. But I think it's even more so in innovation because I don't know anyone in an innovation role who actually has any direct authority over an operating unit. So we can't tell anyone what to do. We can only influence them. And for that, you need political capital, which you don't have if you're new. So you spend and borrow somebody else's, in my case, my boss's. And then we heard before, just heard, then I spend and borrow from executives who are willing to take a chance on me and the work that we're going to do. But it takes a very long time as a newcomer and as an outsider to build up your own bank account of political capital. So that's really the negative side. Now on the positive side, I have absolutely no clue what's off limits or out of bounds. I have no company history at all, and that is liberating. And at a company like Cincinnati, with a preponderance of associates at all levels who are very long tenured, it's actually essential to have some outsider perspective. And so this is the lens that I bring, which shapes how I view innovation. And the second is our company's history, mission, and culture. And some of you may not know about Cincinnati Insurance. We were founded in 1950. We've grown into a Fortune 500 company, top 25 P&C carrier measured by net written premium. And we're a highly diversified company. In addition to commercial and personal lines P&C insurance, we have excess and surplus, life insurance, Lloyd's Access through a wholly owned subsidiary, and a reinsurance facility through Cincinnati Re. So we have a wide range of capabilities. But the thing that most distinguishes Cincinnati Insurance is its distribution strategy, which is exclusively through a small, highly curated set of independent agents. And in fact, this was the founding premise of our company, an insurance carrier created by independent agents for independent agents. This was an innovation in its time, and that spirit of innovation has persisted throughout our company's history. By choosing to call what we aspired to bring to the company's existing innovation efforts a discipline, it allowed us to acknowledge that we weren't the beginning or source of innovation at the company, that we were building on a corporate legacy. And I think you heard Peggy just say that, right? There has always been innovation at Cincinnati Insurance. But what we bring to innovation is a methodology, a toolkit, and perhaps most importantly, a mindset. And so with these two lenses that shape how we understand innovation at Cincinnati Insurance, we set about to declare our intentions, essentially, our proof points, our approach, and our purpose. And you see them here. And they've held up pretty well over the last 3.5 years. We have called innovation and discipline. It's focused on the future. We have situated our agents and our associates at the heart of innovation, both the work of innovation and also the benefits of innovation. We've pointed to the need to engage with new partners and with existing partners in new ways. And finally, we've declared that the goal of the investment in innovation is to generate an economic return. And we declared a pretty bold economic return. So with this declaration of our guiding principles, we also received a mandate from the champion of innovation, my boss, and she said, I want you to start here in the core of our business. And we call this everyday innovation. We call it everyday innovation for two major reasons. We call it everyday innovation to make it easy for everyone to understand what we're talking about. We've de-jargoned it. But we also call it everyday innovation because we aspire at some point in our journey for innovation methodology and toolkit to be ubiquitous in our organization. At the same time we had the mandate to start in the core with everyday innovation, the vision of the champion of innovation, my boss, was that eventually this strategic innovation group would work more in breakthrough innovation, that this everyday innovation would be embedded and ubiquitous in the organization. So with our guiding principles and our mandate, we set out to basically understand how did the organization view innovation prior, because it had persisted throughout our company's history. And the way we did this is we decided, hey, let's use our own innovation methodology to validate the set of assumptions, quite frankly, that I had about how I believed a successful, established company like Cincinnati Insurance probably viewed innovation. So we invited 5 different teams from 5 different parts of our organization, from personal lines, commercial lines, risk management, claims, and life, to come and tell us about work that they'd engaged in that they called innovation. We brought each of them separately into a room, these teams. We had a wide spread of whiteboards, and we placed 3 event markers equidistant on these whiteboards. And this was the first one. We realize we have a problem or an opportunity. We decide to work on it. We get results. We said, hey, fill in the blanks, fill in the process steps in between these. Tell us what those process steps were. Tell us who was involved in it. Tell us how long the process steps took. Tell us if it was linear or looped back. And we listened to these stories. And as we listened to these stories, a kind of meta story emerged. And this is a little bit, I'll call it like a streamlined for presentation purposes, but this was essentially the meta story. An executive came to a department head and said, hey, there's something I want you guys to be working on. The department head assembled the leadership team. The leadership team pooled their collective knowledge. They might have reached out to a friendly agent or two. They more or less came up with a solution and then, in short order, decided to work on it. And the way they worked on it was jury-rigging the existing operating processes, trying to kind of shove the work of this innovation stuff in. So the elapsed time's pretty long because most of the resources that are allocated to operating processes are already allocated. Now, if we did it on our own, it was a fairly long elapsed time. But if we had the chutzpah to have a startup partner, the elapsed time stretched even longer. Frequently, we got stuck in the wormhole of our ISO, our information security, and IT resources. Now, we eventually did get finished, and then we would test it internally, and then we would push it out into the market. And once we pushed it out, it was done. We messaged like heck through our field organization. We really cajoled our agents, but once it was done, it was done. Frequently, we got some results, but they were rarely what we had hoped for in the time frame we'd hoped for, and sometimes they were just not at all what we had hoped for. So what was the takeaway, my takeaway from this? Well, in a nutshell, our process and approach and our understanding, it wasn't customer-centric. It was typically reactive to a set of traditional competitors, and it certainly wasn't outside-in. So we knew at the beginning of things that a mindset shift needed to take place, and that is not a simple or short, a proposition. So we knew that. We knew we were facing that. Now on the plus side, what I want to say about this is it was pretty clear that what our people thought about as innovation was a big problem or a big opportunity, and also that it involved our agents and policyholders. And that aligned with the innovation methodology that we planned to introduce to the company. So these were positive things. Another very positive thing about this alignment around agents and consumers was when we started, we drew a pretty bright line between what was in for innovation and what was out. Out was any internal process innovation. That work, the methodology for that is a change management methodology. And at the end of the day, and it's usually pointed inwards at associates, and at the end of the day, the associates really don't have much choice. You know, you can get their input along the way, but they have to adopt the change. In for innovation was any big problem or opportunity that required our agents and policyholders, consumers, to change their behavior in a consistent and sustained fashion in order for us to be successful. The methodology for this kind of work is a kind of corporatized version of Lean Startup, and this is what we plan to introduce to the organization. Now, the other plus of going through this process, it gave us the first 4 ventures that we worked on, which you see here. We went out, we rented an innovation methodology and toolkit from a local innovation consultancy and training organization who we still use to train and coach. We also made another very important decision. We decided to use our own associates to do the work of everyday innovation. This was a big decision because it meant that our progress toward outcomes was not going to be fast. We had to accept that it was going to be slower because our associates had to learn and apply these concepts at the same time for the first time, kind of like Innovation Graduate School, 101. They often made mistakes. They went off course. Sometimes we didn't get where we wanted to go during our particular sprint. The sprints were 12 weeks. But we felt, because our aspiration was to have everyday innovation be ubiquitous in the company, this was a very deliberate and important choice that we made. So from this core of everyday innovation, we started here in 2019. In 2021, we added a person to take responsibility for what we call breakthrough innovation, innovation in near adjacencies outside the core of the business. And here we partner with a venture build studio. We're also a partner on the Institute's Risk Stream Collaborative. So here we engage more outsiders. We also brought someone in to handle external innovation, this burgeoning roster of partnerships that we have with startups, with academic institutions, and with accelerators. And here we started to kind of gray out that bright line between what was in and out for innovation. And now we do partner with our operating units to actually source startups for internal process innovation. I handle this awareness and engagement with our agents and with our associates. I manage the pipeline and portfolio, and I report on that monthly. In addition to our operating units, who are partners in sourcing what it is we work on, we also partner closely with 3 other groups in the company that we think of as our extended strategic innovation group. First and foremost is our data and analytics innovation team. We don't start work on anything without thinking about the data we're going to need, we're going to use, we're going to store, and need to be available for analytic models. This is so foundational for us. So every venture we work on starts with this. We also aren't getting to market without technology, not at scale. So we partner with our IT organization from POC forward, and the path to the market is through our agents. So we need to have a strong partnership with our sales organization to make sure these new ways of interacting with our agents mesh well with our more traditional ways of interacting with them. And as we stand now at 3.5 years, we're at a very solid place as an organization. We're able to partner effectively with startups to bring new capabilities into the company and also nurture those capabilities we want to see in the industry. We have a growing roster of associates who've had hands-on experience with innovation, using it to solve real business problems. We've partnered with an enormous number of our agencies to test concepts and MVPs in the market. We're able to start new things. We're able to stop them when our assumptions don't pan out. And we've been able to spin some of the stuff back into the business. But this is the challenge that we really face. When we started out, we thought that we would be able to spin things back into the business because we had our own associates working on them. But here is, of course, what we learned. Creating that flywheel effect, right, that helps a new venture scale is daunting. That heavy lift from 0 to 1 just never gets less heavy. And what we learned is that when we would spin things back to the business, some of our most ambitious ones boomeranged right back to us. And so we learned that we had to create this. We couldn't just play in the front end of innovation and move it back to the business. We had to play in the back end of innovation, what we call proof of value. And this helps us create that bridge between those validated POCs, spinning up enough MVPs to hopefully catch that flywheel, so that when we do spin back to the business, that venture merits the same kind of consideration that will rise to the top in that project prioritization process that every operating unit uses to allocate resources. So we've come a long way in 3.5 years, but I would say, like any large organization that aspires to adopt and deploy an innovation methodology, especially to achieve a meaningful economic impact, we're still learning our way through it. Thank you.
So Peggy, I think we have time for just a question or two. And first off, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing the journey with us. You've been at it for 3.5 years, you said. A lot has happened in those 3.5 years, including COVID.
Yeah.
How did that impact you? Was it all slowdown, or were there some silver linings?
So, at first, like everybody, we thought this is going to be 3-4 weeks. We sent everybody back to their day jobs. You got to go back to your day jobs. We're in a crisis. And then we realized it was going to be longer. I'm going to say one thing. I'm going to really throw out some kudos to the Cincinnati organization. Every operating unit supported us. We picked things back up and went fully virtual. And I would say for all the misery of the pandemic, the secret truth for a lot of innovation folks, it was a godsend. Because we had to do virtual inspections. It was on our roadmap, but we had to do them right now. So in 8 weeks, we were able to get to market, at least starting. Our life organization, you heard the Bestow, if you heard the Bestow guy, we still used a lot of paper. Guess what? There was no one to print out the paper. There was no one to carry the paper. There was no one to sign. There was no paper. So we had to digitize. So all of those things we just had to do. We had to do them. They created a burning platform. And fortunately, we had done a lot of work with we knew which startups to go call.
Yeah.
So it was, I think it really also changed the mind of some folks in the organization that we could actually help them solve some near-term real problems right now. It didn't all have to be 3 to 5 years away.
Hear, hear. A couple of people in the audience have asked about resources. So can you describe what dedicated people you have on the innovation team versus leveraging across?
I have one of them here, my head of external innovation, Jason.
Hey, Jason.
Miller. Jason Parks is here. We have a team, we're a team of 6, we're going to grow to 7. I don't think we're ever going to be more than 10 at scale, but we do partner with an outside innovation consultancy, with a venture build studio. And for me, and this is really my perspective, as we mature and evolve as an organization, I think we're going to need different partners. So I think it makes sense for us to keep our core team small and be able to kind of plug in what it is we need at various points in our journey.
Wonderful. Peggy, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason.
Well done. Thank you. So next up, we're going to have a couple fireside chats to continue along the theme of innovation and adoption. And I don't think anyone can question just the role that venture capital has had on Insuretech and on the insurance industry as a whole. You've probably seen the stats, something like $40 billion has been invested globally in Insuretech just in the last 6 years. I mean, you don't have that much, not just money, the capital, but the energy and the thought leadership that goes with it without seeing a lot of changes. So next I'm going to bring up Andrew Johnston with Gallagher Re and Dave Lesher from OMERS to have a conversation about the impact of venture capital and Insuretech trends.
Thank you. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Andrew.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Take one of these.
Yeah, have a seat. So Andrew, David, before I forget, let's do introductions. So
Sure.
Dave, do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself and OMERS?
Sure, my name's Dave Wexler. I'm an investor with OMERS Ventures. OMERS is the pension fund of Ontario. We've got about $2 billion dedicated to venture capital and about $118 billion for infrastructure and larger projects. We are generalist investors investing in a lot of different areas in the venture side. However, I run Insuretech investing. Prior to OMERS, which I joined about 6 months ago, I was at Hippo. I was the vice president of growth there. And I first became acquainted with Hippo while I was at Comcast a few years prior. At Comcast, I was actually in charge of growing smart home growth and IoT. I met Hippo in 2018, did a distribution partnership with them, which kind of led me into Insuretech. I've been basically all in on Insuretech since about 2017, 2018. And prior to that, I did a bunch of startups, raised a lot of venture capital, and have been focused on tech most of my career.
Great. Andrew?
Thanks, Jason. Andrew Johnston. I run the Insuretech business for Gallagher Re, the reinsurance broking arm of Gallagher, Arthur J. Gallagher, the insurance broker. I was previously with Willis Re and was part of that divestiture at the end of last year. And I joined Willis Re in 2016, not from insurance or technology background at all. I was in academia for the most part, and spent a lot of time working at the UN, at the Genocide Tribunal in Cambodia, but genocide wasn't harrowing enough, so I joined the insurance industry. I told that joke a few times. And when I joined Willis Re, Insuretech was this kind of burgeoning topic that was of huge interest to a number of our traditional clients, which are typically insurers, MGAs, and reinsurers. And there was this real sort of existential crisis of disruption and this fear of being disintermediated. And they would ask us how they should plan for this and how they should sort of strategize for this. And to be completely honest, as a business, we didn't really have an answer. So at the beginning of 2017, I launched our Insuretech business really as an outsourced R&D function for insurance companies that were more interested in this space. And I engaged with a number of Insuretechs who said, look, we don't want to disintermediate anybody. We want to work with the industry and sort of sell our software and technology and services into the industry. And I relayed that to our clients, and they said, okay, if you meet a company that does X, Y, and Z, we'd love to meet them. Fast forward to now, I have a team of about 30 people across the globe who are all sort of focused on trying to unearth the next best thing in Insuretech. And we do sort of one of three things when we meet a company that we really like after we've vetted them. The first is to bring them into partnership with our traditional clients where we think there's a natural fit. The second is to bring technology in-house where we think it can support our core day-to-day broking function. And then the third area where I spend most of my time is supporting Insuretechs who themselves originate risk, who are looking for the services through a reinsurance broker for all the reasons that you can imagine. Somewhat perversely to this conversation, we don't actually invest, but we do work with pretty much every investor globally to help companies raise money. So I've got this really fortunate view of being able to have a very strong opinion without taking too much risk. And then I guess finally, the thing I'm probably best known for is a quarterly Insuretech report that I've been doing since the beginning of 2017. And the second one for this year will be out in August.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we will look forward to it. I think we first met at Insuretech Connect, 2-3 years ago in your prior capacity. And it's just so funny to see the three of us on stage. So like my first career was in politics and public policy, and then working on the carrier side, now in Insuretech. But I think one thing that all of us have in common, regardless of how we got to the stage, is a real passion about helping this industry move forward and helping founders bring new technologies and new ideas to the carrier space. And we just do it through different ways. It's sometimes through capital, sometimes it's through relationships, it's helping them build. But let's face it, the world has changed a lot. Not only looking back over the past 3 years with COVID, but even just over the last 12 years, a lot has changed. So let's start with current state. Where are we today? How would you assess the current kind of Insuretech marketplace, both from engagements but also from the venture side.
Do you want to start?
I'd be happy to. So just to set the stage, venture capital, especially from not a CVC perspective, but a traditional venture capital perspective, we are basically paid to find big opportunities. And having kind of an outside perspective, I think, is an asset in a certain way, in that I kind of am unencumbered with the troubles that I've been watching presented here today, and it's amazing to watch. I think the state of the market is incredible. First of all, we are in a little bit of a correction, which I think has to do with some overinflated expectations, but that's very standard in traditional venture capital. We hype things up, some things work, some things don't work, we kind of recalibrate and we go at it again. And we're in a period right now where I'm seeing some of the most creative, interesting startups that I've ever seen, and I'm confident that there's strong applicability. And in fact, I think the more challenging environment that we're entering into right now to raise capital is only going to make entrepreneurs better and stronger, and kind of weed out those who really aren't meant to be entrepreneurs or in this space. So from my purview, and by the way, I'm investing in everything from MGAs to infrastructure. I think it's an extremely robust time, and more importantly, which I'm sure Andrew will talk about, the climate, because of the change, I think it kind of has the industry as a whole looking, right? I think if we had this conversation 2 years ago, my perspective, or the perspective I was bringing to the table, probably seemed a little bit like hype. But now that we've been through kind of Insuretech 1.0, and we're looking at much more refined business models, much more, I think, skilled entrepreneurs, I think all of you are saying, hey, this actually may have an impact versus a few years ago where, candidly, some of the ideas were a little bit crazy. So it's an exciting time, and I think, we're very much involved in it and excited about it.
I think, so I think most people start looking at the state from about 2012. But I think the state of Insuretech really began, in my opinion, in the late 80s, actually, in the UK. And there's companies like Direct Line, which now probably don't seem like they were Insuretech, but at the time they would have been an Insuretech proposition. And we had probably 15 or so years of people wanting to put technology into the insurance industry, but it wasn't a particularly effective process, and we ended up with some pretty misfit type software vendors in our industry. And then around 2012, there was this explosion of really interesting companies that thought, I've been in the industry, I'm working with people that have either got technological chops, or I'm a technologist myself, and I can do something better here. And there was sort of 3 or 4 years of that phenomena just sort of bubbling away, and people putting really interesting technology into the industry. Then around 2015, 2016, there was this explosion of entrepreneurialism. And I think that we actually flirted, in my opinion, with some pretty bad business ideas because people were rushing into this space, and a lot of capital was coming in. And there was a disproportionate amount of capital relative to good grey matter in the investment space. And I think that's why we saw some of the frothy valuations that we've all seen in the last few years. What I would say is, since COVID, there has been this emergence, and I like the 1.0 metaphor, there has been this emergence of the sort of 2.0 or second wave of companies that I think are infinitely better than the first round. And I think people have learned from their mistakes. I think investors have learned that total addressable market is not a good metric for valuations, and that these companies actually have to be profitable and deliver value to the industry. And we're in a really exciting space now. I would say the last 6 months have been particularly interesting, obviously, with the market in the state that it is. Companies are being forced to really focus on short-term profitability, and I think this is going to weed out some of the weaker companies. And speaking to some investors, there's no shortage of sort of seed, pre-seed capital where people are still prepared to make a number of small bets, but there's this real fear for investors that Series A, Series B isn't going to come as readily as it used to, and so they're definitely realigning how they're positioning capital, and there's a real focus on businesses now to return short-term profitability, which I think for the industry is a fantastic thing.
I can agree more with both of you on some of the reset that was needed, but also that it's still happening. Yeah. I think our deal flow is as strong and robust as it has ever been, and still a lot of great ideas, great founders, and the capital is still there for those good founders, for those good ideas.
Great.
And more carriers who are here, who are leveraging them, are helping them get to that short-term profitability, to get the traction that they're ultimately need to get those later stage rounds. Now, we'll see how those later stage rounds, ultimately pan out. But the weeding out has certainly happened. But there is still this slowdown that's happening.
Yep.
Right. And some of it, we probably all agree, maybe more on the investor side is good. Some of the founders might say that's not as good. But let's face it, overinflated valuations in the long run aren't good for entrepreneurs and founders either. But what advice would you give to the Insuretechs and the audience and the founders? How should they be preparing for maybe the next 6 months and the rockiness ahead?
Sure. So we're certainly advising our portfolios, and we speak to new companies to plan for an extended kind of drought of funding. But there's lots of things that you can do in that period. Most importantly, it's optimize your business model. I think prior to this kind of turndown, it was commonplace to see, two people with a pitch deck raising a round and getting a little bit of traction, then raising a very large round. And that, to your point, doesn't really create any value for the ecosystem. So, we're now really focusing, and this may sound strange to people outside the investment community, but, again, we're paid to find the kind of big, crazy bet. So when the action's so hot, you just try to get a spot at the table. Again, it's a bizarre mentality, but it's almost needed the way venture capital works. Now that we have the slowdown, it's okay, let's really talk about business models. Let's really talk about proof that your product's going to work and how it's going to work and where the product market fit is. And that's a discipline that I think we can work with founders, as well as cash conservation, where do you really need this many people? Do you need this many trade shows? Do you need to take this many gambles? Can we focus on execution on 1 and 2 areas versus 10 areas? So I think it's a much more disciplined approach to starting businesses is what we're focusing on now.
Yeah.
I mean, I echo everything you've just said, and we're already seeing, unsurprisingly, right? I mean, we are already seeing some fairly high-profile Insuretechs laying off staff, and I think people are just aware that they need to make those dollars and pounds last a little bit longer. I do think that businesses are having this reality check that VCs and PEs and even reinsurers aren't just kind of dumb capital growth providers anymore. I shouldn't say anymore. I mean, it was never really the case, but I think they were viewed as such by some fairly bullish entrepreneurs, and I think that train has definitely left the station. And so it is about focusing on what you do and what you do well. And if you're in the business of underwriting, our industry does not benefit from the economies of scale that other financial service industries does, in as much as if you can't underwrite profitably with a small demographic of people, just by the virtue of scaling isn't going to make you profitable, right? And so it is worth drilling down and having realistic growth expectations, not feeling the pressures to go into 50 states overnight, understanding the types of people that you need to hire. Things like marketing is really, really important, but that's kind of stage 2, 3, 4, and that's an easy way of spending a lot of money. So spending all your raised capital on Google AdWords, right? That will come. But understanding what you do well and really drilling down on that and having a focus on profitability, I think is the right thing to do while being pretty careful with the purse strings.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit there, I will acknowledge that from the venture capital perspective, traditional venture capital, a lot of us are used to the tech days where you could build companies unprofitably because sooner or later it would work. And I think many of us had the wrong assumption that could be done in insurance. We didn't understand all the aspects of reinsurance and how this actually works. But it doesn't mean that anybody was wrong as much as that was the going in position. And now with a lot of capital, a lot of dry powder still available, there's just a recalibration. This is actually how we are going to do it in insurance. This is how we want to partner our way in. And these are the new mantras that we bring to the table. So again, I think it's just learnings and we're all learning together.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is I've kind of picked up on, over the last 6 months or so is just this general maturation of the market, though, as well.
Definitely.
And it's because both sides of the coin are coming up together. We've had, the activity on the Insuretechs, and here again, outside of that first wave that were the ones who are going to put the incumbent carriers out of business, most of the Insuretechs anymore are actually providing solutions to help, traditional insurers better service their agents, their policyholders, et cetera, more efficiently, new data, new tools. But yet on the other hand, we now have enough carriers coming in to be those customers to provide the revenue. But the other thing that's kind of happening is there is more and more solution providers who are trying to bring solutions to Insuretechs. So whether it's traditional companies or even new startup companies whose job is to help Insuretechs grow.
Yep.
What are the other signs and kind of the pivots that are happening in the maturation of the Insuretech space that you see playing out?
Should I go first?
Happy to. So to your point, solutions providers are starting, I think, with Insuretechs because the sales cycle is shorter and the need for innovation, I think, is actually higher in a lot of ways because they need solutions. But I think from the maturation perspective, I just think the conversations are very different. From the venture perspective, candidly, I think many of us were a little confused how the MGA, MGU model worked. And now we're going into these discussions with clarity and an understanding of how reinsurance slides work and how commissions work. And I think more importantly, there is that understanding that we can't run these businesses in perpetuity without actually making money. So what we're seeing, certainly in the pitches that we're seeing, is a very focused approach. Say it's an MGA, maybe in a niche business, with an understanding of how they'll underwrite better, how they'll be more efficient in their operations, claims, whatever it might be, and how that will result in positive unit economics and can scale to a large magnitude that makes it a sizable exit opportunity for a company like us. And by the way, some thoughts around exits as well, which before I think was just like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And now it's much more about, I can grow an MGA that looks like this to this much revenue, this kinds of profitability, and there are 50 carriers who would like to acquire me at the end of that, or alternatively, perhaps I'll go public.
Mm-hmm. I think part of the maturation story is just around education and people being better informed about what actually makes sense. And if you look back to 2016, you had a lot of pretty major global carriers involved in loads of different initiatives, which, if you had all the resources in the world and all the time in the world, were, honest and interesting and fun, but really they should have known better, right? I mean, are we going to put the entire industry on blockchain? No, we're not. But honestly, in 2016, those kinds of conversations were sort of we're having. And
you couldn't hear a pitch without someone.
Honestly.
All the bingo buzzword, right?
Yeah, every year there seems to be a word. I think we've just got over the embedded puke, but it's...
We'll come back to embedded in a minute, perhaps.
Well, what is it? $7 trillion opportunity.
Yes.
North American insurance market is $3.1 billion. Yeah.
But somehow math works.
It'll work itself out. Anyway, and I think people are just better informed now, and people are asking the right sorts of questions, and there's a lot more sort of intellectual rigor around not just what the proposition is, but what the proposition looks like in a problem-solving capability. Yeah. And it's not just things looking for things to solve anymore. The other thing, and it's sort of the other side of the coin, and it's not necessarily good news, but it is a sign of maturation, is that there are a number of digital assets now available for acquisition relatively affordably. And that is a sign of a maturing evolution of things that have gone well for some people and not gone well for others. And that is just part of the natural evolution of this.
We have far more questions, not only from mine, but from coming in from the audience that we're going to have time to get to. So audience members, if you do have something, this is the time to get them in right now. I'm going to switch to a couple audience questions. I'll pick one out maybe for each of you. So David, let's start with, and this is probably more of a clarifying question from an earlier discussion. So with the slowdown in funding, is that a result of available capital reduction or reduced risk appetite?
So I think it's a little bit of both. I think there are lots of venture capital firms with lots of dry powder ready to invest. I think that said, many who were throwing money into Insuretech have backed off because they've realized they don't have the discipline or understanding of the space. And I think what you're going to see is some of the generalist funds who invested in Insuretech are backing down to say, we'd rather not participate because we just don't get the complexity. And again, I think that's a good thing. The other piece is that many of us are in capital conservation mode to some degree. So we're looking at our current portfolios to say, hey, we've got big investments in these companies. They may not be able to raise money in 6, 12 months. Let's make sure that we have enough to support them as the market kind of settles in. So it's no shortage of money. It's just basically our risk tolerance has gone down only because we're looking at protecting our current assets, and the broader pool of capital, I think, is retrenching a little bit away from the space. All that said, I'm seeing more CVC opportunities in Insuretech than I've ever seen before. I'm seeing more dedicated funds and funds that have done well in the space, adding more capacity. So I think in the end, it actually levels out quite well. It's just this moment in time where things are uncertain, and it's, again, a natural part of the evolution.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
It's not just the funds that are dictating those prices as well. I mean, we're working with a number of Insuretechs that are intentionally not trying to raise massive amounts of money. They don't need the stress or the headache of that kind of overbearing valuation. But if you look at the numbers, the investment numbers from Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year, global deal count in terms of deals done was actually identical.
Yeah.
But there was a huge reduction of cash invested in Q1. There was an uptick in early stage investments, and there was an uptick in low-level Series A. So I think all of the conversations are still happening. I think there's no shortage of wonderful businesses, but people on both sides of the transaction are just being really intentional about what does this number mean, and is it going to become more of a headache to us than being pragmatic?
Yeah. Real quick, had a couple questions come in about the importance of revenue and getting to profitability. Either of you have a quick perspective?
It's everything, right? It really is. And it's not just everything for your investors, but it's everything for you as a business. And I don't think investors are interested in these quick trampolining liquidity events anymore. It's too risky. So I think it's the one thing that everybody can agree upon is the ultimate thing to look to try and achieve. And it's healthy for the industry, right? It's not good for any industry to be propped up by overinflated venture capital, because it will come back on us one day. And as an industry, we're trying to evolve in a very constructive way, and I just don't see it being good for anybody to sort of support businesses that are never going to be profitable.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Wrap-up question, minute apiece. David, we talked about Insuretech or Innovation 1.0, Insuretech 2.0. What's Insuretech 3.0 look like to you and when?
Well, we're, I would say, in the middle of 2.0. What is 3.0? So I think it's some comments made earlier in the day that risk transfer is going to always be risk transfer. The nature of insurance will be the same. I do think, obviously, and some of these are very clear, like alternative distribution. You may puke on the word embedded, but I think it's a smart one. But I think there's also emerging risk, and that to me is actually where the industry should engage the earlier companies so much. Like, who really wants to take on these risks that are unpriceable right now? That's what venture capital money's for, and that's what reinsurance who's willing to take a little risk is for.
Yeah.
Pandemic, cyber, things that we've never seen before, which I'm sure we're just at the onset of some of these things, will be a level of risk. And I'm seeing really interesting data sources for these risks as well. Things that just were inconceivable to me before, and now in this digital era, the underwriting capacity is so novel, but really only a startup would actually have the time, energy, and/or resources to actually focus on these problems that may not even be problems yet. So I suspect 3.0 is just different kind of risks distributed in different kinds of ways, and probably much more in the background than it is today.
Great.
I think 3.0 will be a redefinition of the linguistics around Insuretech. I mean, I think it's a given now that everything coming into the industry has a technological slant to it, and so the technological part of it will almost become the least interesting part of it, I think, is the next wave. Something just has to make sense commercially for our industry, period. And if it's backed by great technology, then that's wonderful. From my own personal perspective, I'd like to see more community initiatives taking place. There's so much overlap with development. The technology scrapyard is huge, and there seems to be a huge opportunity to work together as a community, as our industry is predicated upon. And that might look like things like, market clearing placement platforms, reinsurance placement platforms, where you can introduce secondary trading because you can place, digital instruments and financial indexes underneath the core parts of the risk, and we can look to find other sources of liquidity to bring into the industry. That, for me, would be a fantastic initiative.
Awesome. I will add Insuretech 3.0. We are just going to start to see the wave of M&A consolidation.
Yeah, definitely.
You think about the vintage 2016 to 2018 companies. They've now 4 or 5 years. They've figured out how to solve their problem, getting towards profitability. But from a carrier side, I don't necessarily have to work with 5 different Insuretechs to get to really one set of solutions that I'm looking for. Those are going to start really consolidation, and that's where they're still going to see more investments in those later stage rounds to enable those exits.
Yep.
Agreed.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate your insights. Yeah, that was fun. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, David. Thank you. We have one more fireside chat, and we're going to continue the conversation talking about Insuretech innovation. So please welcome Matthew Jones with Anthemis and Tom Lyons with Poly back up to the stage, or off to the stage.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Matthew, have a seat. All right, let's get the introductions out of the way. Tom, please introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself, Poly, and why you're here.
Sure, Tom Lyons. I'm with Poly. I've been there for 2 months now, so I'm a newbie there. Prior to joining Poly, I was with Plymouth Rock Assurance for about 16 years, and at Plymouth Rock, I oversaw their direct response business. I oversaw all of their strategic partnerships and all their affinity partnerships. But what compelled me about going to Poly was really the way that they were growing and the way they were thinking about growth through embedded insurance, and they've brought me on board as their president and chief operating officer.
Fantastic. Congratulations on the new role, and good luck. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Matthew.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew. I'm on the investment team at Anthemis. We are a venture firm focused on financial services, and within the firm, I work on our investments related to the insurance industry. My background is that I was at Swiss Re for about 5 years before joining Anthemis about 5 years ago. We are now the most active venture investor in insurance globally. We have a portfolio of about 35 companies, all of which are in some way related to the insurance industry. And we invest at 2 different interesting points in the life of a company. We have a fund that invests at pre-seed and seed stage, and we have a fund that invests at Series B and C. So kind of just when things are really getting off the ground, and then when things are really beginning to take off.
You know, one of the things that I love, getting back to the theme earlier about the relationships within this industry is, I mean, I've been able to know you for several years now. Actually saw you at your London office back in 2019, pre-COVID, when I was attending Insurance Innovators Summit in London. And if you don't already have it on your schedule, they'll be back in London this November 15th and 16th for Insurance Innovators Summit. I hope to be there, so I hope to see some of you there as well. But some people think VCs might be competing against each other, you know, going after the same deals. And sure, yeah, multiple VCs may look at a deal from time to time, but more often than not, we're a pretty close-knit community because the next time we might be co-investing in a deal or investing in a different stage of the same company. We have at least 1 or 2 companies that are in both of our portfolios. And also, we oftentimes, I think, go out of our way to help founders connect with the right VC. So even if it's not a fit for Manchester Story, it might be a better fit for Anthemis, and that's how so much of capital actually does get moved around. Same thing though on the Insuretech and carrier side. I just really appreciate the camaraderie that happens across our industry. So I wanted to get that out there and use that as a setting point for our conversation because let's start with 2020. Where are we at? What opportunities are you seeing for Insuretech to disrupt or for Insuretech to partner and collaborate? And Tom, since you've been on kind of both sides now and now on the founder side, would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so just going back to my background, at Plymouth Rock, I oversaw the direct response business, and I also oversaw our captive agency channel through Prudential Agents. And I also oversaw our Insuretech relationships, our national account partners. And Poly was one of those partners. And as I looked at the future of insurance distribution, I thought the way that independent agents kind of evolved from a market share into direct writers, I think the future of insurance distribution is on the Insuretech side. What I believe that Insuretechs bring to the table is the best of both what a direct writer offers in terms of digital experiences, digital marketing capabilities, online consumer experiences, large call centers, large sales centers to service those customers, but also the best of what an independent agent offers in terms of choice to multiple carriers in market. So you bring those 2 things together, and I think that the future of insurance is on the Insuretech side. So that's really what kind of prompted me to leave the carrier side and join Poly.
Excellent. Matthew?
So when I was still at Swiss Re, actually, is anyone from Swiss Re in the room? Okay, we're good. Okay, anyone from Munich Re? No, I'm joking. So when I was at Swiss Re, just before I left to join Anthemis, I remember we had these kind of big group-wide projects on disruption, where we were essentially panicked like hell, trying to figure out where this Uber moment was going to come from. And if you kind of take a step back for a second, this was around the kind of 2014, 2015. Uber was, I guess at that point, just really kind of getting up and running. I don't remember the exact dates, but had launched and was in a few cities. And I remember the C-suite and the senior management team being terrified that there was going to be an equivalent moment in insurance.
Yep.
And it never really turned up. Yeah. I think it's fair to say. And I think we've all kind of moved on from the disruption kind of narrative that a lot of people put out there over the last few years. I do still believe, though, that, and sometimes get into heated debates with underwriters about this statement, but I do still believe that there isn't really any line of business or any part of the insurance value chain that is immune to the effects of technology.
Oh,
okay. And so, I love meeting with founders that are tackling brand new lines or lines where we haven't really seen much activity. We have recently backed, for example, a neo wholesale broker who is looking to shake things up in a certain part of the market. There aren't many of those around, that's for sure. We have backed companies that have developed brand new products in commodities insurance or in drone insurance, for example, or even trade credit. And so we've definitely moved past the disruption kind of phase and thinking more towards how can we, within this existing kind of construct, being the insurance industry, create some really exciting businesses that can get to substantial scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Tom, having just made that jump from carrier to startup, mm-hmm. What are maybe some of the things that you brought with you that would be helpful for other founders to think about?
Yeah, so insurance is a heavily regulated market. So when, from a carrier perspective, you think about things like adverse selection. Insuretechs that don't really have that level of underwriting experience don't know those two words. And if they describe those two words, they're not describing them the right way. What we've done at Poly is we've built this carrier onboarding tool. It essentially allows us to make sure that we're protecting our carrier partners. And as these Insuretechs think about the future and how to best partner with these carriers, it's about working with them, running profitable business, not just for themselves as the Insuretech agency, but also for their carrier partners. If those carriers are not profitable, they will not stick around and the partnership will fail. So I think about it as a kind of a partnership and really understanding the type of business they want, the type of appetite they have, and placing the business that they want, and doing so with minimal kind of point of sale rate leakage and things like that.
Yeah, Matthew, in my last fireside chat, Andrew was up here and he talked about some of the innovation that was even happening back in the 80s and 90s. And when I think about the space that we're in, it's kind of this whole notion of what's old is new again. Mm-hmm. Like oftentimes with technology, we have the opportunity to solve the same problem we've solved before, just with better bells and whistles. Or you mentioned the Uber moment that so many feared, because Google or Facebook or Walmart's going to start selling auto and home insurance. Yeah. And I love to remind people that I didn't get a chance to mention this with Peggy was on stage earlier from Allstate, about how Allstate used to get a lot of their growth. They sold through Sears and Roebuck. Mm-hmm. And isn't Sears and Roebuck just the Amazon of their time? But I also remember when I thought Amazon was going to go broke. They almost went in bankruptcy several times before they pivoted. So kind of using those two, far out examples, where do you see some of the Insuretechs today having that opportunity to kind of get past that hump?
Well, I think the insurance industry gets a really bad rap from people when it comes to technology adoption, because they forget that actually insurance companies were for some technologies, the first to adopt those technologies. So whether it was using computers for policy administration and tracking policy premium payments, whether it was natural catastrophe modeling through, for example, RMS 20 years ago.
All that legacy technology that people, hem and haw about, that was new once upon a time.
The reason it's legacy is because they were, in many cases, carriers were the first to adopt that technology. Yeah. And part of the challenge is, if we kind of look at the broader market, but part of the challenge is that the insurance industry actually works pretty well. Even if you look at all of the kind of macro disruption and kind of volatility that we see right now, the industry is in not so bad shape, right? Certainly on the life side, for example, the life insurance industry came through a pandemic pretty well. Dividends are still being paid. On the P&C side, okay, pricing could certainly do with improvement, shall we say, in certain lines. But overall, the industry's in pretty good shape. And I think that contributes to, I think in certain places, a feeling of a little bit of complacency. But what I've noticed is there is never any complacency, or there's very little complacency, to actually answer the question, there's very little complacency when I think a carrier is faced with a company that actually solves a problem.
Yeah.
And I think we've actually only just come out of this phase of leading with solutions rather than leading with kind of made up problems that aren't really a pain point for the carriers, rather than solutions that actually make a big difference. One of the things that we talk about in pitches, but also kind of once we've made an investment, is what is the actual impact that you are going to have on which metrics, and demonstrate to us that you have an understanding of kind of where you sit in an organization and why people should care.
One of my favorite things to do with our portfolio companies, let me ask, how many founders do we have in the room? So we have mostly insurance carriers, and that's fine. We have a few founders. And Tom, this is where I'm going to get around to a question for you in this regard. Here again, bridging from carrier now to the founder side. I love to have my founders pitch to me, and then a couple days later, I pitch their company back to them. Most founders have never heard someone from the insurance industry try to pitch their company. And it can be very eye-opening just to hear how maybe the proper language or the terms, just those extra insights. So for carriers, if you're thinking about mentoring or working with a founder in Insuretech space, do them that favor. Hear their pitch and then pitch it back to them. They will be incredibly grateful for it. So where I'm trying to get that to then is some of the best practices. We've heard a lot on the stage today about incumbent, carrier, Insuretech partnership. There's so many different dynamics, the build versus buy, cultural fit, having the strategy, solving the problem. Tom, what advice do you have for those who are on either side of that aisle today?
Yeah, I would say be receptive to collaboration and partnership. You look at kind of P&C agencies out there that are growing rapidly, then there's life insurance agencies kind of growing rapidly out there. Can you combine forces somehow and have your respective businesses work together in an operating model where you're sharing your customers, sharing your technology, et cetera? So I think collaboration is key. In terms of like the organization itself, I think that there needs to be kind of an embedded kind of entrepreneurialism throughout the organization. So for the staff, you need to think about kind of setting the goalposts around, here's what we want to do, here's our strategy, here's our vision, and everybody plays a part in that strategy and vision. As long as you stay within the goalposts, you're empowered to take risks, you're empowered to make decisions. And I think that's where the Insuretechs that succeed will find a way to kind of foster that culture, foster that environment to allow their company to grow and allow more people to play a big part in that growth.
Matthew, one thing that I've appreciated about Anthemis, I think Manchester Story tries to do some, similar vein. For some of us in the VC space, it's not just about writing a check, right? There are plenty of VCs, there are a lot of organizations out there that have been just throwing money in the space. It's the check, but it's also how are we going to help you grow your company? Through advice, support, making connections back to the industry, et cetera. So from the VC standpoint, what do you think those successful partnerships look like between VC and startup, and maybe ultimately to the carriers as well?
So I think the first thing I would say is the best investments that we've made and the best ongoing relationships that we have are a result of spending a good amount of time together before investing. Whether that's grabbing a coffee, whether it's grabbing a bite to eat, whether it's just kind of sitting with a whiteboard. Always open for a beer. But whether it's with a whiteboard and just problem solving together. That's the first thing. Or, one of the things I will do is prior to making an investment, I will ask the person that the company that I'm in diligence with, who would you like to talk to? Like companies that could provide capacity, potential customers, like who do you want to talk to? And I'll try to make 3, 4, 5 different introductions to that company, no strings attached. One, because it's good for the company. 2, the feedback that I get is incredibly helpful. And it helps me to figure out if I can be useful to those guys on an ongoing basis. So I would certainly say that that's really the thing that immediately comes to mind, just taking time to get to know each other. And I think to your point about who's been investing over the last few years and who's been active in the market, it's frankly been a lot of firms that didn't really do that. They kind of had a couple of meetings and threw out a term sheet, and that was it. And for some of them, that was their model, right? Tiger Global, that was their model. They will do a very quick diligence process. They will get to a decision very, very quickly, and they will leave you alone. They won't take a board seat. They will just kind of stand aside. And for some founders, that worked really well. But I think we would, the way that I like to operate anyway is, if I'm going to invest, I want to make sure that I can actually be useful and not just another kind of, face around the table.
Yeah. So with so many of our audience, from the carrier side, what advice do you have for them, either as they're considering investing in Insuretech, partnering, or doing both, partnering and a strategic investment?
So I think, much like Manchester Story, we have quite a large number of insurance companies that are our investors, our LPs. And so we are interacting with insurance companies, the industry at large, on a regular basis. And we're able to, therefore, benchmark who kind of gets it, or who's making, actually, the best way to put it would be, who's making most progress in achieving the ambitions that they have. And I would say the most important thing that I've observed is to just know what's important, know what you want. And one of the best investors that we have that's an insurance company, they have 3 strategic priorities. And if we send them anything that doesn't fit with those 3 priorities, they'll say no. And that's okay. It'll be a very quick no as well. It'll be a very, within 24 hours, 48 hours, it'll be, yes, you know what, this is not one for us, but thanks. And I think there's a fear in certain parts of the industry that if we don't say yes to every introduction and speak to everyone, we'll miss out on something or we'll lose out. On the flip side, I do think that there are some companies some startups where I've been very surprised that they've got partnerships off the ground after having kind of met the teams and the companies. And I think the flip side to not necessarily meeting everyone is, do your research on which companies are operating in a given space. Figure out who's been funded, who's got the cash to be able to survive, say, the next 18 months. But I think knowing your priorities and having a good sense of how the market kind of is lying are the 2 big learnings that I've had.
Awesome, thank you. Audience, we may have time for a question or 2. If you want to ask a question of Tom or Matthew, this is the time to get those submitted via the app, so thank you very much. Tom, I don't think we can talk about the change that's happening across the industry. We can't talk about Insuretech without also talking about talent. And that's not only talent for carriers, it's talent for Insuretechs, and especially when Insuretechs are sometimes hiring from the carrier side like you. Now that you've been on both sides of those coins, what advice do you have? What are you seeing in the talent space?
Yeah, what's worked well for me is in the past, I've tried to hire folks directly kind of out of college, kind of inexperienced people, bring them into the insurance world, give them kind of a frontline job, whatever that job is. It could be in sales, it could be in service, it could be on the marketing side. But get them into insurance, get them to learn it kind of at the grassroots, the front line, and then kind of go into the claims organization, go into the product organization, go into the Insuretech ecosystem. So really it's about kind of getting folks to, earlier in their careers, trying to mold them, let them learn insurance kind of from the front lines and really understand it, to some level of depth. I've often said that insurance has a lot of breadth and depth, and a lot of, you got to know product, pricing and the claims and the marketing and the distribution, but you got to know the depth of those things as well. It's one thing to know a little bit about each of those subjects, but the people that succeed are the ones that know a lot about a lot of different subjects and a lot of details about those subjects. So really bringing them in the front lines, teaching them the right way to do to run the business, and letting them grow within the business in other areas.
I think I've already been asked at least 3 or 4 times just since I got to Nashville yesterday. What are you seeing? What's interesting to you? Because we have somewhat of a unique vantage point, especially on the VC side. We see so many pitches, hundreds and hundreds of pitches. And so we get asked a lot, what are you liking? What are you seeing? What's really intriguing? And so my stock answer is, more often than not, it's not any one thing. It's where several of these technologies are coming together. But I'm going to turn the table and ask the question of each of you. When it comes to top trends in Insuretechs, whether it's technology or a combination of technology, what are you seeing on the edge of your radar screen?
I would say tech-enabled insurance agencies. When I think about kind of what's going on in the industry right now, one of the reasons I left the carrier side to join Poly was the fastest growing distribution channel within Plymouth Rock was the Insuretech space. And I think that there's a way to make them profitable from a loss ratio perspective. So it's really about the tech-enabled insurance agencies, thinking about embedding the insurance product into whether it's the mortgage process or the car dealership process. I believe that's kind of the future of where we're going.
Matthew?
So I would agree with kind of how you summarized that, which is, we're really interested in everything. I would say the one line of business that I've been, if I was to pick one thing for us to kind of talk about for a second, the one thing that we have become very interested in and actually invested in recently was cyber. So we actually were very bearish on cyber for the last 5 years. In fact, we actively avoided it, I would say. We were very skeptical of any of the companies that we were meeting ability to really understand the risks that they were taking on one side and putting on other people's balance sheets on the other. And then towards the end of last year, we reconnected with, and then this year invested in Cowbell, which is a Manchester story portfolio company. And, for the first time felt like we'd met a team that really understood it. And I think we're actually now seeing the emergence of, and I think it's Gallagher that have coined this, the idea of PC&C, property casualty and cyber. And I feel kind of more confident than ever, actually, that is something that will happen. And I think that will bring about a kind of very broad ecosystem of players that will all contribute to that line. So I would say that's where we've been spending a lot of time recently and continue to kind of go deeper and deeper into.
I hadn't thought about this, Matthew, and this was totally not planned by any regards, but you mentioned Cowbell Cyber. So Jack Hudell, the founder, actually went through the Global Insurance Accelerator. So Megan Brandt, who was up here earlier, went through that accelerator in 2019, came in with basically a business idea on a napkin. At the end of the 100-day program, he utilized his mentors to help build out a business plan. Manchester Story led, the seed round that helped him build out his tech stack and look at where they are today and getting a growth round led by Anthemis. That wasn't planned at all, but a nice little string of events for folks that have been on the stage, and a great example of where good founders are leveraging carriers, are leveraging these ecosystems and leveraging the VCs to help grow their companies and ultimately do good things. Gentlemen, we are out of time and maybe have 30 seconds apiece if you want to share final thoughts or bits of advice with our audience.
Yeah, just keep, from an Insuretech perspective, there's the world is a playground right now. There's a lot of different opportunities out there. Somebody will find the way to work, to work insurance as a transaction through Alexa. So the way the future of insurance as I see it is you're sitting down at your dining room table and Alexa says, hey, Tom, do you want me to shop your insurance? It's coming up for renewal right now. And I say, sure, go ahead and do that. And then 10 seconds later, Alexa comes back and says, hey, I shopped it and I found a better rate with Progressive for X amount of dollars. Would you like me to make the switch? And I say, sure. And then the whole process is done.
Yep.
Somebody will build that. Somebody will find a way to make that happen, and it's a matter of who's going to do it first.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Tom.
As in, what was the closing thought?
Closing thoughts.
I think there are a lot of bruised balance sheets and egos from the last few weeks and months, but I do think that I do agree with Andrew, who was up earlier and is the author of the excellent report. I do think that we're probably about to move into a very exciting time. In fact, I'd go as far as to say, if anyone's thinking of allocating to venture, the best period to be investing is the next 2 years that are coming up, rather than the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant ideas will emerge as we
And you're not supposed to buy high and sell low? Is that not?
Well, that was some fun strategy, but we'll talk about that later. So I think there's going to be some really exciting stuff funded over the next couple of years, and now is really the time to kind of get stuck in. So very optimistic, even if, like I said, people are kind of feeling a little bit bruised at the moment.
Matthew, Tom, thank you both for your time and
Thank you.
insights.
Thank you.